Audience members have a tendency to be able to recall information that comes at the very beginning of a speech more than that which comes at the middle. This is known as the primacy effect, or the idea that audience members are most alert, most ready to take in information at the beginning of your speech. This means the beginning of your speech is very important. It sets the tone for your speech. It helps your audience to get into the right mood to understand your speech, and it helps them to understand your purpose. So spend a lot of time working on your introduction and your conclusion. However, I do want to note that introductions and conclusions should be the last thing you write. So you should write the main body of your speech so that you understand everything that's going into it, and then you can use that information to write a strong introduction and conclusion. A good introduction should have 5 main aspects. It should have an introduction, a relevancy statement, an expertise statement, a thesis, and a preview of main points. Before I walk through each of these, I wanted to explain a little bit about timing within your speech. Some students get so caught up in their introduction that it ends up taking half of the time of their speech. That's a problem because people didn't come to hear you introduce a topic, they came to hear you explain the topic. So you want to introduce it well, but you want to do so quickly. Typically, we can think of our introductions as taking about 10% of our speech, and then our conclusions taking out another 10%, with the full body of our speech coming from that 80% where most of the meat and the heavier stuff is. That means if you're giving a short 3-minute speech, your introduction should be less than 30 seconds. You don't want it to go too long. If your speech is upwards of about 10 minutes, then you can have your introduction last closer to about a minute. But you want to be careful here. So covering these 5 topics quickly is going to require you to be prepared. So as I cover these 5 things, these are things you want to think in advance, making sure that you've covered all 5 of them. An attention getter is the first thing that comes out of your mouth. This is how you draw the audience in. A bad attention getter will distract the audience or cause you to lose credibility quickly. So this attention getter might be something like an interesting statistic or an example based on your topic. Make sure again that it relates to your topic. A random statement that doesn't relate to your topic, even though it might be interesting, it is really going to hurt your speech. So make sure you're drawing in information that is interesting and relatable. Good quotes here work well as long as they're short. You might tell a very short story. You could ask a question. Now, I will say that sometimes this is effective, but most of the time it's not. Rhetorical questions tend to be the easy way into an attention getter. So I allow students to use one attention getter throughout the semester. I'd encourage you not to use it at all. The problem with an attention getter or asking a question is it gives the power to the audience. If I ask an attention getter question, and my audience responds in a way different than I expected them, that could ruin my entire speech. So I encourage you to steer away from asking questions, but if you want to do a rhetorical question, they can be effective, and I'll allow you to do one this semester. The other thing you might do is establish a connection with your audience. You might point out an event or a place, or you might even point out a specific need that the audience has. Typically, I see that those who use interesting statistics or a brief quote tend to be the most effective. The second statement in your speech should be a relevancy statement. The goal of the relevancy statement is to help your audience understand why they should care about the topic. If you're teaching me about something or trying to persuade me to do something, the first thing you need to do is help me to see why I should care at all. The third thing that you need to do is give an expertise statement. This is where you help the audience understand why they should listen to you. Now, in this class, I know none of you are experts on your topic. None of you have PhDs. You haven't been in school for that long. That's okay. All I want you to do here is getting into the practice of giving expertise statement. So in a more professional setting, you might hear someone say, I've been a doctor for 10 years, or I did a dissertation on this topic. It's something to show the audience that they've gained some credibility. For you, you will simply do something to show that you have studied the topic. So you might say, I spent 6 hours in the library studying this topic, or you might say, I have a grandma who studied this topic. Now, we realize that in this class, those expertise statements may not show actual expertise, but I want to see that you're thinking through ways to show the audience why they should listen to you. At this point, you are familiar with a thesis statement. This is a single declarative statement that clearly shows the audience what your purpose is. This should come in your introduction, towards the end of your introduction, helping your audience to see how the speech is going, what the main goal of the speech is going to be. Again, make this clear. If you need to, pause before and after you give the thesis statement. This should be something that your audience is not confused about. They should know what your thesis is, and they should be able to explain it in their own words. Otherwise, you're not being a clear communicator. And finally, you need a preview of main points. This is typically a sentence that explains how the main points will unfold. So, for example, I might say, today I'm going to teach you about cameras. I'm going to do so by talking about the different focal lengths. I'm going to talk about the different types of bodies, and I'm going to talk about the different ways of producing film. Right. So you're first you're saying, here's my thesis, and then you say, here's how I'm going to explain it into these 3 main points. So a preview main points helps your audience to know how the speech is going to unfold. Please avoid apologies in your speeches. You'll see that tendency often where people will get up and say, I apologize, I just found out I was giving this speech, or I didn't have as much time to prepare as I wanted to, or I don't know that I'm going to give as good a speech as so-and-so. That does nothing to help your credibility, and typically it just is bad form. So we want to avoid that. Let's shift gears and talk about concluding our speeches. Now, if you've done a good job of writing your speech and you've done a good job of writing your introduction, writing a conclusion is going to be a piece of cake for you. So this is where we use the principle of the Regency effect. This is the idea that your audience tends to also remember the very last thing you say. Often when they're thinking back on your speech a couple days later, your conclusion is going to be what dictates the emotion they left with, and therefore how they remember your speech. So a strong conclusion helps them to feel something about your speech and therefore move forward appropriately. The anatomy of a conclusion is very similar to that of an introduction. Here you're going to signal the end of the speech. This is really important because you don't want your audience to be surprised when you end. You don't want them to look around the room wondering, oh, what did I miss? So you're going to help them to know. You might help them to see, okay, as I wrap up these concepts towards the end of my speech, here's where we're going to go. So that way you're helping to ease them in. This puts their mind into the mode of processing so they can process everything you've given them. Your conclusion should include some sort of reminder of your thesis. You don't have to state it again verbatim, but some way of reminding them, here was the thesis of my speech. You should review briefly the main points. I taught you this, and I taught you this, and I taught you this. And then it should have a concluding statement. This is where you end with the bang. You have some clear statement that shows my speech is over and I'm leaving you with something powerful. Now you'll see in here that I've included another one. It's called a call to action, and I've included it in red because most of your speeches will not have a call to action. In fact, most of your speeches should not have a call to action. But if you're doing the persuasive speech at the end of the semester, that's the only one, you should include also a call to action. This is what you want your audience to do after your speech. So this might be, I've talked to you today about school uniforms and the benefits of having school uniforms. Now I want you to all write a letter to the principal expressing your desire for him to implement school uniforms. So this is now that I've given you my speech, here's what I want you to do about it. The last thing that I want to say with conclusions is that there's a tendency for students to feel uncomfortable after they've ended their speech. Often there's a small pause and the audience doesn't know yet if they're supposed to clap. And so that because the speaker feels uncomfortable, they'll say something like, thank you, or I appreciate your time. And those things just sort of invalidate your concluding statement that you're going to spend a lot of time ending with. You're going to end with that bang, with that concluding statement. So avoid saying things like thank you or and that's it, that's everything now. Just get used to ending with that bang and then standing in silence. For those of you who have been to a symphony or an orchestra concert before, you'll notice that the really good pieces, the orchestra will stop playing and it will take a few moments before the audience starts to clap. It's not because the audience is confused or surprised about the ending. It's because they're enjoying the moment and then they want to clap. So you want the same thing to happen. You want your speech to be so powerful and your ending to be so powerful that they want to just sit there and enjoy what they learned and then start clapping. So don't feel awkward if they don't clap right away. That's okay. That's natural. Give them a moment. They'll clap and they'll remember your concluding statement.